Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it's a truism that videos and discussions beget more videos and more discussions, and today is going to be no exception. So today I want to go peer a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole, peel away some more layers of the onion, and talk about this phenomenon, which I find is intriguing and worthy of some more examination. And I hope that you get involved and give me your own experiences because it is kind of unusual. It's intriguing. So I made a video very recently talking about my Achilles heel of mine, where I felt a little uncomfortable narrating what success might look like as a player. And I'm playing this all-for-one regime diabolique ubiquity-based game. Great game. It's a great mechanic. I have no moral objection or whatever to how it works. However, it's a little bit uncomfortable because to me, and this is my own experience growing up, and starting to play like D&D back in like 1981, very early on in the hobby, that the default setting seemed to be to me that once the dice are rolled, then the game master had narrative control over what the success might look like or the failure might look like. It's interesting because talking to Runeslinger and some other people, Runeslinger in particular said, well, he grew up during the same time, and that's not necessarily the default setting that he came away with. That's very intriguing. It's because we were exposed to the same things, played the same games, read the same magazines, etc. in our formative years. And what's even more interesting, I talked to him, I said, hey, the funny thing is that, I've played with other people that are around my age, started playing the game relatively around the same time, but I only met them like 5 years ago or 2 years ago. And, almost to a person, their impression on where that default, demarcation line was in terms of narrative control tended to be right around there. That, the game master kind of determined what that success or failure looked like. Not always, but overwhelmingly. And this can't be just a Connecticut, United States thing. And in Canada they play different. But it's he's had experience with people that just felt a different way. So why would that be the case? And so I don't have an answer for that question. It's interesting. You got to figure, okay, different locations, but it's a question that's worthy of some discussion. However, I want to talk about this a little bit and maybe like where he and I aren't necessarily so different in terms of what our default settings are. It is also kind of an interesting side discussion just for a second. I want to talk about, there are some celebrity D&D shows, things like, I guess, Acquisitions Incorporated, Critical Role, Penny Arcade, C-Team, where the game masters, have this other default where they will kind of, edit what the players say or, tell them how they think or how they feel, which to me is, way out of bounds. That's in my locus of control, which is just not what I grew up with. I mean, and to me, a game master telling me those things would just be, completely out of bounds. So maybe there's a third default setting that people kind of grow up with. However, getting back, I think if you've watched my channel, you've probably heard me say at some point that I feel like as a player, I have control over everything that my character says, does, thinks, and feels. That's mine. However, the game master, on the other hand, they have control over, the rest of the world, and they get to have control over what the final outcome looks like. It's funny because in talking to Runeslinger, he made this really good point. He talked about the idea that many times this is not necessarily an issue of narrative control so much as it is an issue of description. The idea that somebody has to make this addition to description to the ongoing narrative. And if the player is unwilling, unable, for whatever reason they just aren't doing it, then it kind of falls upon the game master to fill in those blanks, to kind of flesh that out. So that's oftentimes his experience when he had to do that as a game master. And, I've had that experience myself. We've all played with those people where if you can I try to hit them with my sword out of them, that's pretty darn good. So you need to fill a lot of those blanks. It's funny because I don't want to say I misspoke, but he said a little bit more eloquently than I did. He talked about the idea that to him the locus of control, the agent, the player, or the character would be like they have control over what their character chooses to do, why they might be doing this. That's their intention, and what that might look like. And of course, that would be the thing that I would say many times. Depending on the player, I certainly try to, and I've had many players that do this. We narrate like what we hope our action ends up looking like. This is my intention: is I want to sit there and I want to push this guy over in his chair and knock him out the window. And then we roll some dice and we'll see what actually finally happens. At that point, I would to me, the default would be I would turn the baton over to the game master, and they finally have final narrative say. It's funny. I think of what Runesinger calls, I believe he calls it premature imagination. And we've all had players that kind of do this, where they will, I think that's a default setting that a lot of people enter the hobby with, because they're used to just playing make-believe as kids. And so, I had a player, I tell a story a lot about the player that said, well, I scamper up this ladder in the hayloft, And as the bandit is scampering up the ladder after me, at the very last second, I'm going to push the ladder over, and he's going to fall and bump his head or whatever. And it just so happened that I had him do an opposed roll, and he won. So that did happen. I think I kind of edited it that the bandit didn't actually hit his head and get knocked out. Because that was a little over the top. I rolled damage, and that certainly didn't happen. He was in that game system, the guy was still okay and kicking. So I did what complex game apologists would call game master as editor. And I think he didn't make up that saying, but I think that's the first time I heard it put that way. And many times to me that's all you have to do, or all I've done as a game master is I've had people that were very, very descriptive. They describe what this might look like, and then I kind of edited it a little bit afterwards based on success or failure, or if they were just telling me something that was like way over the top. I'm like, okay, let's tone this down a little bit. However, so we're not that, we don't approach the game that differently. In terms of that, I think where the final difference is, which is interesting. Why would it be this way, having had the same experiences for the most part? How I perform my action, what it might look like. The final, at least in my default, or how I grew up, would be that at that point the game master has that narrative control, or that's their job to describe that. Whereas the default setting of that game, those older games or whatever, for Anthony wouldn't necessarily be that way. They would still describe as players what this finally looked like if it was a success. It's kind of intriguing why we would have those differences. It's funny. I made this comment that hey, even in the old first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, all the examples of combat and examples of play, there was plenty of premature imagination in there. And I think somebody said, "Oh, I squashed the spider with my boot. I smashed it with my mace." Well, you had to make a roll and see what happened. So I don't know. So why do we read those things? And for some of us, many of us came up with this default that I did. That okay, now it's the game master's job to describe what this happens. And other people came up with this idea that okay, well no, I still get to describe, or it's the player's job to describe how that looks after success. And then why did other people, these celebrity D&D shows, why did they come up with this default that the game master gets to edit all sorts of things, and the locus of control, the agency? Are you listening to Same Old G? Are you listening? The agency of the player shrinks down to almost nothing. Why do we come up with all these different default settings for those older games? So, what's your experience? What do you think? What have you encountered? Have you encountered people that have radically different versions or impressions of what the norm might be than you did, even though you had very similar experiences? How about that?